Alright, so for those of you just tuning in, we're about to spectate a 1v1 on the map Arabia between my viewers as part of my weekly Twitch TV live streams. If you want to get in on this, I recommend you head on over to my Twitch page and scroll underneath the video player there to find my live streaming schedule. Today's topic will be a civilization matchup analysis between the Goths and the Britons on Arabia. So Okerville will be playing as the Britons, and Assassin will be playing against the Goths. I realized that the last civilization matchup analysis video that I did, which was the Mayans versus the Goths, was fairly popular, so I wanted to revisit it again. This time explaining, I think, one of the more common matchups in the game that people complain about. It's definitely going to be the Britons versus the Goths. Why is that? It's basically because the... hopefully we don't drop this game. My internet dropped last time. It's because the Britons are a very strong archer civilization, and the Goths have the strongest anti-archer unit in Age of Empires to the Huskarl. The Huskarl is virtually impervious to archer fire, and then we have, but on the other hand, the Huskarl unit actually has no melee defense at all, and that is the secret to beating it. During this game, I will be explaining exactly the steps that you can take as the Goths player to beat the Britons, and the steps that the Britons player can do to actually beat the Goths. Because contrary to popular belief, this matchup is not as one-sided as it appears. Even though the Britons aren't indeed an archer civilization, you would think that they would be incredibly unfavored. But this matchup is actually fairly close. Before we get too far into it, I'm going to start by briefly introducing the players. On the top side of the map, we have Okerville playing as the Red Britons, and on the left side of the map, we have Assassin playing as the Green Goths. Even though these are llamas, rest assured that this map is functionally exactly the same as Arabia. I have only switched the assets around since they use some of the new African Kingdoms assets. Of course, I'm always open to your guys' suggestions on things that you would like to see from me next, or any specific Civ matchup videos if you want to explain why you feel like that matchup is fair or unfair, and then I can analyze it in more detail. Indeed, Mirzak, welcome to the stream. So, basically how this works is that the Goths as a civilization are very weak in the early game. Why exactly is this? Well, if we swap over to Assassin's perspective and take a brief look at his tech tree, the thing that we want to pay attention to here is that Goths lack any sort of significant early game economy bonus. Villagers plus 5 attack versus wild boar and hunters carry plus 15 meat is really not enough to carry you through the early game. In fact, that bonus is really only helpful if for some reason you were, long distance hunting your boar or, long distance hunting from your deer. Which does help a little bit, but the thing is that compared to other economy bonuses in the game, such as the Mongols, hunt 50% faster, and particularly the Britons, shepherds work 25% faster, the Goths' early game is quite weak. Thank you so much, someone else, for subscribing for 12 months. It is your 1-year anniversary. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, someone else. Thank you as well, Gudiger, for the 100 bits. So yes. The Goths are very weak early game, and this is compounded by the fact that they have no stone walls, they only have watchtowers. They are a very offensive civilization with poor defenses. And not being able to stone wall means they have a lot of trouble getting to the late game. How do we balance it out? The Goths are kind of a feast or famine civilization, something I'm not a huge fan of dealing with. The thing is with the Goths is that if they do survive and get to the late game, they become a nearly unstoppable powerhouse in some matchups, like for example against the Mayans. Ooh, God, good save at the last second here by Okerville on getting that villager inside the town center. Excellent elephant lure. It's just that there's so much noise going on in the background, it's distracting me. So the Goths are like really, really strong in the late game, and sometimes it can feel like they're really overwhelming and there's almost nothing you can do, especially if you are playing as the Britons. But the main topic of this video that I wanted to discuss is that all hope is not lost when you're playing the Britons. It's actually a fairly different dynamic than the Mayans versus Goths. It's similar in that the Britons are favored early game versus the Goths, since the Britons have a stronger economy and the Goths are really slow and they can't get out the stone walls to defend themselves. But in the later stages of the game, the Britons don't necessarily have to get run over by the Huskarl unit. And to explain this in a little bit more detail, the Britons are more than just an archer civilization. They're not actually that binary. And I will be explaining the Goths are not as binary as they seem either. It's a very common complaint that players will be playing as the Britons and they just get run over by the Goths. The thing is the Britons get access to champions. They have fully upgraded champions. And when you're dealing with Huskarls, you want to ask yourself, do I have any strong melee units versus champions? And that's the thing that you want to be making. You want to stop making archer units. Don't make longbowmen, don't make arbalists versus the Huskarl. What you want to do is you want to make strong melee units. Things like knights or champions. Now, why not make knights, though? That is a really good question, and one I also get asked a lot. The thing is, if you end up going for knights against the Goths, they have a very easy transition into pikemen, since they have all those, the significantly discounted infantry, and their barracks work 25% faster, and they just spawn units almost immediately, so by going for mass knights, you're kind of giving the Goths a little bit of an easy out, where they can just easily just make a ton of pikemen and just clean up all of your knights. So that's not always going to be optimal. But it is a legitimate option for the Britons player in really any civilization matchup. And this is because in the Castle Age... Ooh, is Scout's gonna live? In the Castle Age, everyone's knights are created relatively equal. If you don't have bloodlines, it's not a huge deal. It does matter. It's just that the knights are still relatively on the same playing field. And when you are... Oh my. We have any laming going on here? Shame on you, Okerville. Nah, he's gonna run away. Oh god. It's in the Castle Age, the Britons actually have a fairly decent night rush due to the fact that they can get to the Castle Age nice and quick with their 25% faster shepherds, and then they have the discounted town centers, which allows them to easily boom off like a 2-stable knight build. M Frisbee asked, do you know if it's possible to get Aoe2 or Aoe2 HD to work on a Mac? I think you have to use like Wine or something like that. I think that there is a Mac version of Aoe2, but I don't know if it works very well. And with HD, I think you need to use some sort of Windows emulator. So yes. Oh god, there's just so much stuff going on in the background of my house, it just distracts me. I need radio silence. Basically, the Britons are more than an archer civilization. You can end up going for cavaliers. Like, they have like a fairly nice night rush. Since you can just go for like a so you can go for a 2-stable night build and then put town centers off the back of that, since the town centers cost less wood, which is actually pretty nice. Did he end up losing his scout or something like that? Oh my. And if you are the Goths, though, like, the Goths also have access to a wide variety of units that do come into play later on in the game, and even early in the game. Things are not lost. Even though you don't have a very strong economy bonus, what you can do is you could very easily try and... You want to survive as the Goths in almost every matchup. There's not a single Civ matchup in the game where you're like, oh, I'm really fast, so I can just kill them outright. Killing them outright is an option, but for the most part, your general game plan is going to be try and survive, get to the late game, where you are going to be favored, since you can just spam infantry units like the Zerg of Age of Empires 2, essentially. The Goths, though, in the late game, you don't necessarily have to spam Huskarls all game. And in fact, if you're making nothing but Huskarls, you do end up putting yourself in a situation where your opponent is, actually able to counter you with things like champions. Champions should always be your go-to counter to Huskarls, or at least the thought. If you have forced your opponent into making champions because you made a bunch of Huskarls, as the Goths, you can actually very easily transition into hand cannoneers, for example, to really heavily punish that. The Goths don't have that much of a limited tech tree. It's really only... I think the Huns have probably one of the most limited tech trees in the game, mostly because they only really get strong cavalry units and then trash units and like siege rams. So if you have very strong counters to cavalry, then you can kind of just sweep right through them. But for the most part, the Britons and the Goths are not as binary of a civilization as they're made out to be. So we see that Assassin a little bit slower to the feudal age than Okerville is. Okerville, our Britons player, of course, is going to go for a very standard 2 archer ranges with the Britons. And this is because, of course, the Britons just have very strong natural archers. Archery ranges work 20% faster, also bolsters this. And then once they get to Castle Age, they can very easily get Bodkin Arrow and then Crossbowmen to just have a really strong timing attack. If you are Assassin, what can you do? Well, as a means to survive and allow yourself to get to the later stages of the game, you still get Palisade Walls, which is important. I really like the 3 Militia Drush build as the Goths, where you make 3 Militia in the Dark Age, so you mine 10 gold with a villager. Don't build a mining camp, by the way. Just long distance mine that 10 gold. Make 3 Militia. I've got a lot of videos showcasing that. Use that to harass your opponent in the early game. You don't necessarily need to kill any enemy villagers, you just need to get them to, fight back, and then you pull back with the militia just to get some idle time in their economy. Oh, sorry, he's only going for 1 archer range, so he's actually probably just going straight for the Castle Age. Or at least he's considering it. Well, no, he's not. I don't know, he's actually going only on 1 archer range, and he has the blacksmith, so that means that he got the fletching immediately, but that's actually kind of weird. I think I would have preferred the double archer range and then the blacksmith later, rather than 1 range off the bat, and then... Yeah, it is kind of weird. We'll have to see how that pays off. So I think like a 3 militia drush, you can even transition to men-at-arms, is actually fairly strong as the Goths, and you can even go for like a men-at-arms tower rush, and that usually works. So you can 3 militia drushes the Goths into the fast castle age, and to try and get those Huskarls out. Maybe even build a really strong early game castle. It's just that I think the skirmishers are a decent option here. Is that what he is going for? Is he going for like a more of a defensive skirm build, or is he trying to fast castle here? This, I think, is absolutely crazy in this matchup, and I would not really recommend it. It looks like what Assassin is doing here is he's attempting to go for like a naked fast castle age versus the Britons. Okay, so he's an archer range, and he has a stable. Here, I think we're suffering from some indecision 2016 from Assassin here. A little bit uncharacteristic of him. This build does not make that much sense. Because in the early game, what you want to do is you want to be focusing generally on like 1 or 2 types of units, generally 1, because it's much easier for you to just get the upgrades for those. So if you're going for scouts, your bloodlines doesn't benefit your skirmishers, for example. And here, what you really want to do when you're in these early game early game engagements is you want to make sure that you have that fletching upgrade. And here, fletching doesn't benefit his scouts. So he's just kind of in an awkward situation. It looks like he really wanted to go for that fast castle age. We know because he's also housed, too. He needs to build another house. I mean, he can keep losing villagers, though, and it kind of balances out. He's not queuing up any villagers, either. I do think that he can actually clean up this this engagement, though, if he actually moves out with those skirms, too, or is he just going to leave them on the defense? Overall playing, like, oddly defensively, too, going for only, like, 1 archer range, so I feel like the double archer range from the Britons was probably just fine. And I think that it was aggressive enough that you could just win the game. Because I do think that even though the Britons do have ways of dealing with the Goths in late game, and I just want people to remember the fully upgraded champions are what you need. Welcome to Stream Throttle. Fully upgraded champions are what you need here, and just a little bit of a disaster is he's just not engaging with all of his military units at the same time. Elevation advantage for red. The Britons do have ways of dealing with the Goths in the late game, so it's definitely not a wash, but I do think the Goths are just ever so slightly favored in the late game versus a lot of civilizations, if it ever gets there, where everyone's in the Imperial Age with max upgrades and just massive economy. So good cleanup here from Assassin. Did lose a lot of villagers, and he still will be able to get to that castle age. It looks like he wanted to kind of fast castle into Huskarls based off the way his economy is set up, because he's a lot in stone. He might be able to do it because Okerville only on 1 archer range. Thank you, Some Flying Burrito, for the 8-month resub. Much appreciated, and I hope to see you in the future. Yeah, Assassin just, delicately trying to balance this out by making sure that he does not spend too much of his money on his units, making just the right amount, so that way he can get to the castle age, make some Huskarls. He's honestly in a reasonable situation to do this, if he can micro this carefully. That is some pretty solid micro here from Assassin. He's behind, but I feel like Okerville is just playing a little bit defensively early on, like maybe just a little bit too defensively. I do think that the Britons are favored in the early game, so I would have liked to see that double archer range. He opted to get fletching immediately. I think sometimes that's okay, but against the Goths, I think that the double archer range was just the way to go. And they would have applied more pressure having a larger army of archers than it would be if he just had fletching with his archers like he did. So, since the Goths are slightly favored in the late stage of the game, it's not an over game. Like, don't resign if the Goths get to the Imperial Age if you are the Britons. You can still totally win by making some champions and whatnot, and just playing strategically. Because again, you make champions and force him to make hand cannoneers, and then your archers now deal with that. So now we're in a very interesting mixed army situation, which I think is kind of fine versus you. Your champions do beat their champions because you have plate mail armor and he doesn't. So that's always kind of nice. I just would have liked to see some more aggressive play from Okerville here. He's up to 3 archer ranges, so now he's really kicking it into high gear. This is a strong economy, and he's not that far behind Assassin on his way to the castle age, so this will be a very interesting match. Assassin up to the castle age now. He's getting fairly close to having enough stone for a castle. He's a little over 100 off. Moving forward with these skirmishers, I also think is not quite right. When we look at the scores here, Okerville is ahead. He must have more military units or villagers, something, and really Assassin just has like no economy of any description. It's really small. So I think moving out of these skirmishers is actually a huge mistake on Assassin's part. It might even cost him the entire game. He still hasn't made another house. He's making 2 knights right about now. This is actually pretty good, because I think Okerville's also in a really funny situation, because Okerville only has 4 archers here, and he's leaving unescorted, so this 1 knight will be able to defend against this, so he's actually not going to die, and Okerville is going to pull out. Assassin is housed. I think Assassin's going to lose these skirmishers, but Okerville may be playing a little bit too defensively. They're going to lose all 4 of these archers, and then pull back these remaining. Assassin's getting ever closer to that castle. Playing versus the Goths is kind of like a race. Zoom Lens asks, what's the difference between a fast castle and naked fast castle? Great question, Zoom Lens 9. So naked fast castle age, and I did a break the meta episode in this, is when you make no military units, military buildings, or anything. You don't, you know, you have nothing. You did not attack your opponent, and you don't have any military units to defend yourself, and you go for fast castle age. So it's like you have no defenses, basically. So you're doing it naked. Or as a regular fast castle age, you know, maybe you ended up making some military units before it. Maybe you ended up making 3 militia, or you're defending yourself with some skirms, some spearmen. Kind of mind-boggling that Assassin is actually aggressive here, and I think that Assassin needs to pull out. Like, I think he thinks he's winning a little bit harder than he is right now. He only has 2 knights. I think that he's going to lose both these knights, and really he needs every military unit he can get. I think that... Ooh, whoa, what the hell? Man, The purpose of this video is so that when you are in this matchup, you guys know what to do. Because these guys are really good players, and I think they're playing well, but I don't think either of them are necessarily playing this matchup how I would recommend. You know, I've watched a lot of competitive Age of Empires 2, and I've been playing it since I was a kid, and I do think that the thing with this matchup is that... God, does he know that's there? If he does, then it's like GG. Well, he doesn't, but can he see it for some, like, glitched out reason? Or is he just pulling out over here for some reason? Can you see that? Did he scout this? Why is he moving over here? Is he moving over here to defend himself against those skirms? God, is he gonna see this castle? Absolute disaster! No! Anyway, I think this is not... I think this is just ill-advised. Delete the castle, my friend. Oh, no. You have to understand how the civilization dynamic works out. If you're the Britons, I think you want to play this more aggressively early on. I think that you wanted to go for the double archer range opening. And you could even go for scouts or whatever you want, just as long as it's a fairly aggressive thing. I think the 1 archer range plus blacksmith is sometimes fine, but I think it's just a little bit too passive in this matchup. Because you do have that Goths fear, like, delete the castle, start building in your own base, please. Oh, please. Delete the castle, build in your own base. Ah! My blood pressure. Oh man, poor Assassin holding on to this. My friend, the dream is dead. Backpedal, 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 delete that castle. Get the stone back, please delete it. You actually get the stone back. You get the stone back, your percentage of the stone back based off how much it was constructed. So, please delete it, please delete it. Build the castle now. If you're the Britons, you want to play this aggressively early on. You fear the Goths in the late game. You know it's not over, but you still want to, cripple them early because the Huskarls do cause you a headache. If you're the Goths, you don't need to take unnecessary risks. This castle is a textbook definition of unnecessary risk. Delete it, please, for the love of God, delete it. Oh, my heart. Delete it. Delete the castle. Come on. No. It's gonna delete at the last minute just to play with my emotions. That's GG. No way. Are you kidding? No way. He didn't delete it, did he? Oh my god! That's it, that's game! You can win if you're the Goths, if you just deleted it, you could have built the castle here. You don't need to take these unnecessary risks because you are favored as the game drags on. Favored does not mean it's over, but favored means that things are good for you, so... You have to understand these civilization dynamics, which is why I do these videos, because playing these matchups is not intuitive, so I really don't blame these two at all. And I do think that they're both playing well, and I actually think Assassin would have been in an excellent position if you built this castle here. He had a really, solid start. We have to give Assassin some serious credit here, where he managed to defend with just enough military units, even though he was caught in kind of an awkward situation where he wanted to fast castle age, but, he ended up getting rushed, which I do think he should have seen coming, but I think he defended against it really nicely. Did not slow down his castle time that much, and I think that his game plan was just really solid. It was. And I think he executed it very well, so major props to Assassin. And I think he is able to defend himself quite nicely here, too, with a Mangonel, which is what he needed to do. I think that he didn't need to take that unnecessary risk. He was being a little bit too flashy. You want to play to your civilization's strengths and the matchup strengths. And in this case, almost always when you're the Goths, unless it's in a team game or something like that, or a different situation, it's just that I think this castle could have very easily been placed here initially. I don't even think he needed to necessarily delete this one. I think he could have just, from the start, his game plan could have been to put the castle here and just play defensively. Because even though the Goths are not a defensive civilization... Oh, nice mangonel shot here from Assassin. Well controlled. Ogurville applying some great pressure here. Good juke on his part, too, taking advantage of the split formation. I think Assassin is playing this well. It's just that his game plan... This is exactly what I wanted to showcase. Assassin is playing this well, but his game plan for the Civ matchup is just a little bit off. I think you do want to get those Huskarls out in this matchup. You really do. In most matchups, actually, as the Goths. At least against an archer civilization. If your opponent's going for knights, obviously you don't want to do that. Good on him to repair these. It's just that it was such an unnecessary risk to do this with like 2 forward villagers. I feel like that was just... If this castle was here, it would have just been a different game. Now, I know that he has this huge, like, awful hill at the front of his base. That makes it harder for him to play defensively. But it's still possible. If you put the castle right here, he's still fine. Yeah, I think that's just gonna lose him the game there. So I think this is an excellent example of how to play this matchup. So even though the match is not close, I think that makes it much better that it's this way. I do think it's much better this way. So I actually kind of like that it went out this way. Yeah. Yeah, we decoupled the unit animations from the frame rate, I believe, in patch 4.8. So the animation should look a lot smoother, even if the game doesn't run that well. But patch 4.8 was still fairly significant improvement. Yeah, I think that this is just probably I could not have asked for a better example. In this matchup, you don't want to take that unnecessary risk. Put the castle defensively, unless you're winning, which he wasn't. I think that there were a lot of times when he thought he was further ahead than he is, and he has been playing really well. He has been like he's defending against this. He's just so far behind because he lost at 650 stone. This would be a different game if he deleted that castle. And he could even be winning right now if he built it here initially. Yes, I think Ogurville is just going to close down. Ogurville, applying some very good pressure here, transitioning to 3 archer raiders. I told you guys about that power spike when you get to the castle. You get Bodkin Arrow, Crossman. 2 very cheap, powerful upgrades. University coming down, monastery. So Ogurville's even considering going to 38 population to 105. Assassin is defending so well. He really is. But he's playing a losing game. He already lost when that castle was down. Because his economy is too small. He has elite skirmisher. He is holding on to dear life, but he has absolutely no chance of winning this game because Ogurville is just so swole at this point. So, Assassin Tribe, that was just too cute. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, yeah, Ogurville I think is playing a little bit too passively. I don't blame him, just like I don't blame Assassin for trying to play a little bit too aggressively. These 2 players needed to switch mindsets this game. We needed to take their brain and put them in the robot chef, swap them, and I think that they would be playing very well. Yeah, I think Ogurville is playing a little bit too passively. I don't think Ogurville knows that he's winning as hard as he does, and it's obviously much easier for us to see that while we're spectating, but when you look at the scores and whatnot, we can tell that Assassin must be very weak, and that castle was destroyed, so we don't really feel the Huskarls, so he can actually just kind of end this, and that's why, like, I see the 4 Siege Workshop here. I think Assassin thought he was, like, winning early on, is just trying too much crazy stuff by going aggressively, but if he just knows the game plan is to defend, get some Huskarls, he can win. If he gets this castle out, he isn't necessarily lost. The problem is his economy is so small that I think he's still lost no matter what, once this castle comes down. It's rough to see him cling on to dear life. Zach Bucko, welcome to the stream, hello. That was fun, please. I do really hate playing against the Goths when I'm like the Mayans or something like that, but the Britons versus Goths matchup is one that I don't mind that much, because I think it's one that players just play really incorrectly. I can't tell you how many Britons players I've seen play very passively early on, and then they like make nothing but archers, and then the Goths player just gets out those Huskarls and just sweeps them, and the Britons player's like, what happened? What happened is that the Britons player usually misses out on some valuable early game pressure and then doesn't realize that they can make other units. Champions are the answer to most of your problems in this matchup. I don't know what that was. Here comes a few Huskarls. I mean, the problem here is that Assassin's economy is just too small. He hasn't really been able to keep his economy working. Imagine if he deleted that castle, we would be in this situation, but with Ogurville not imp, and it would be so much closer. Because a lot of the time, as the Goths, you will be on the back foot. You will have the smaller economy, you will be behind, but you are able to claw it back with those Huskarls. They're so annoying to deal with, especially if you get the scale mail armor upgrade for them. It's just that this is too little too late. Another thing that Assassin did early on that I think didn't necessarily need to happen is that He had both a stable and an archer range in the feudal age, which again, like we were talking about how that's not very efficient from an upgrade standpoint, in which I would have liked to have seen. And he also tried to go for this fast castle age without really anything to back it up, and he tried to forward the castle. If you're going for a naked fast castle age, I think that dropping it forward is almost always wrong if it's not like arena or something like that, because, you know, you got the walls there. Just because you're going to have enough trouble defending yourself anyway. If he had this forward castle here, I don't even know if it necessarily would have worked out, because his own base would have been... Nah, it probably would have, but yeah, his own base would have been harder to defend. I think I would have liked to have seen him open up with maybe 2 archer ranges of his own, going for some skirms, predicting the Britons player to go for archers, because it's just so standard from them. Or, you know, maybe going for like a drush or something like that. Maybe go for scouts. But I think going for 1 archer range, 1 stable is just a little bit too much. I'd be happy to redo this one, of course, with a little bit of a different play, because this is supposed to be educational here. Assassin knows exactly what he needs to do, and I think next time he will be in the situation to... Yeah, because we have to give him credit here, because he lost this game technically like 15 minutes ago, but he's been defending this so efficiently that he's actually been able to survive at this point. He got the Elite Skirm, he got the Huskarl, he knows what to do. It's just the matchup itself isn't as intuitive as it seems. I think a lot of Britons players play a little too passively early on, and then they make the mistake of making archers in the later stages of the game where you want to, you know, do things like champions. And then some Goths players, I think, end up playing a little bit too aggressively early on, and then they end up just throwing the game. And that some Goths players lose because they make nothing but Huskarls and then they die to the champions. So this matchup isn't as black and white as it seems. Now, hopefully that this game showcases that. I will probably redo this if you guys are interested in me watching this, and watching this again, because I wanted to showcase, you know, long swordsmen in the Castle Age, 2-handed swordsmen, champions going up against Huskarls like we saw in the previous game, rather than something like this. I do think this is a good example of it, but this only showcases one aspect of the Britons versus Goths matchup. We didn't see the unit counters coming into play because these guys do have answers to each other's civilizations. So I would like to showcase the unit side of it a little bit more. This was just a general strategy thing. And, you know, GG well played here, as Okerville does end up coming out on top. Both players played great. Okerville on his way to the Imperial Age. I think he transitioned through this game like pretty smoothly, and if he was just a little more aggressive early on, that would have been fine. But I don't think he was necessarily like too passive. I don't blame him for that. It's very difficult to know, and it takes a lot of experience to really get a good feel for where you stand in the game, how far ahead you are, and the scores don't tell you the whole story. But what does are the achievements. You know, largest army 8. We've seen plenty of heroic games where the Goths can claw his way out of the ashes with a couple of Huskarls and just mop up a huge army of crossmen. This was not one of those games. Really, the thing that won the game here for Okerville was just his very large, well-balanced economy. You know, Sass was never able to get over 37 villagers.